So I think the first question has to go to the first of two Kevins on the stage, Kevin Donoghue, about what was it, why did Fórsa look to commission this research? What was the thinking behind it? What were the questions that you had that you were looking for answers? And did you get those answers?
So the reason why we did it is because members really care about it. And the public at large really care about it. I think that the evidence has shown that. And it was really important for us that we responded to that. There was a survey also conducted by Amárach last year, which showed that more than half of members see it as the top priority for them outside of pay. So it's obviously critical for us to respond to that and to develop that. What we wanted out of it was hard evidence. That's why we went with Amárach and Ireland Thinks rather than conducting it ourselves in-house, so that we have that independent analysis and we're able to, I suppose, stand on quite a firm footing and saying, this is what the experience of remote work is, this is what people want from remote work, and so on. And I suppose the other thing is, people will have been aware of this, especially in the last 12 or 18 months. A lot of the conversation is dominated by employers who are issuing these return to office mandates with no evidence to back up what they claim they're trying to address. And it's a thing that, it's a gap, I suppose, that we felt was very significantly there. In terms of did we get what we want out of it, I think the slides have shown that yes, yeah, we definitely did. Like, I do think it's important, like, rather than making the case or making an argument for remote work, to have independent evidence. So, like, there is a fear, I suppose, when you go looking for that you might not get the answers you're looking for, and I think it was an important decision for Fórsa to take to do that. But it's very clear, remote working works, and we need to make sure that what's there is protected and what's enhanced or expanded can be done as well. So we're very excited with the results that come out so far.
That's brilliant, thanks for that. And turning to you, Margaret, we've had numerous mentions of the working group you're chairing. The Taoiseach himself mentioned it. The third Kevin, the General Secretary, in his response also mentioned it, and I mentioned it in my opening remarks. So you have been hearing a lot of this research that the first Kevin has mentioned, and it is, to be fair, coming from many perspectives, not only employees, but managers, line managers, employers, employees themselves. Having listened to all that research, how does what Ireland Thinks and Amárach, their research, fit into what you've heard to date?
I think it shows that it very much aligns with research that we're hearing through the working group. And it shows that it's quite complex, but I think we know, first of all, that hybrid is not going away. I think it is here to stay. And what we have to understand now is kind of get research to understand how it works. But we already have research that shows there are benefits. So we have the Fórsa report and the Kevin's report, Sinéad's data, that clearly shows there are outcomes for employees around work-life balance. But the most interesting one is around productivity. So that when people have an opportunity to work from home, they've got quiet time to work on certain projects and they're productive. And Nick Bloom is a researcher in Stanford, and he has consistently used large data sets to show that hybrid working leads to productivity. And yet what we're often hearing from the employer side is that we're bringing employees back to the office or back to work because we want them to be more productive. And even the language I just said there, or one of the quotes that Kevin had, which was 2 days in the office and 3 days off. And what I suppose it's understanding that if you're in the office working, that you're working at home. And I know we had a speaker come to the working group to differentiate that you're working at home, and that's your workplace. One of the other things that came out was around the career development. So one of the slides showed that remote workers felt that there wasn't an impact on their career development and progression, which is important, but it's also had to have an oversight, because we know from some studies that managers perceive that employees who are working at home are less productive. And I think there's a huge amount of work that has to be done around a manager's mindset of a hybrid worker is equally productive. And that visibility of being in the office often doesn't mean productive.
I think that's a really good point, because while it's the work-life balance that is really driving the trade union campaigns, looking to improve access or to keep an arrangement, a work-life arrangement, the battle will be won and lost around productivity. And I think that's one of the really important findings coming out of the two Fórsa commissioned research, is around productivity, because in many ways we have to speak the employer's language around them. We have to be able to answer their concerns around remote working. So thanks for that, Margaret. Sinead, I know we asked you the impossible task of condensing all the research you had into those short 15 minutes, few slides, and then we made it more impossible by blindfolding you, more or less, for your research. So was there anything in your presentation that didn't make the final cut, that's left on the cutting floor, or you didn't have time to develop that the key findings for you, or surprise findings?
Yeah, I think it's perhaps these on-site workers who are experiencing more problems when they're working on-site, and they're perhaps a group that are not being addressed fully, their needs and like what's causing those issues. Certainly there seems to be a desire, if a quarter of the Fórsa members are working fully on-site, but only 9% would like to kind of continue that. Now, it's not necessarily linear. You don't necessarily go from working fully on-site to fully off-site, but it's just interesting to see what do they feel they're missing. I think exploring that in a little bit more detail, understanding if they believe that their work can be done remotely, what are the barriers to accessing that, and how can they be assisted in benefiting from remote working as well.
Yeah, I think that was one of the interesting findings from your research for me, that there is this, the difficulties that you may face when you're working from home, accessing colleagues or a particular ability to do your job. We assume then that they will just disappear if you're in your employer's workplace, where quite clearly your findings were showing like they might lessen, but they don't disappear.
And there was, we explored a little bit more further that issue where there were problems with remote workers, but we did probe as to whether that was directly as a result of working remotely or not. And for the most part, it depended on the situation, naturally, but for the most part, it wasn't purely because they were working remotely, and in many cases where it was, initiatives were being put in place. So there is progress and development around where there are problems, and I think maybe greater sharing and learning of what is being done to help overcome those issues is kind of a way to make, again, remote working more accessible to all.
Yeah, perfect. So, second, Kevin, one of the things that jumped out for me from your research was that near division between attitudes to workers when their employer either asked them to come back from a remote working arrangement or increase their number of on-site days. I had thought it was much more contentious, at least that was my impression of it. And of course, and you point to this yourself, those that are more annoyed at it, we're going to hear from those more than those that are accepting of it. So can you tell us a bit more about what makes workers more agreeable? Like, what is it that when there's a change in a flexible or remote working arrangements, that some workers are more agreeable to that change?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things about this research is that it's you could say it's horses for courses or something. The jobs market, people's occupations are so heterogeneous. There's lots of just different types of jobs, and different types of people, and different types of tasks. So I'll just give you two examples of two different people we spoke to. One was kind of a computer programmer, Another person was a graphic designer. In both cases, they were working on jobs that, you know, was quite intensive. They wanted, you know, a block of 6 or 7 hours to concentrate on this task, you know, to be able to do it. In both cases, they mentioned how working in an office didn't work for them in terms of productivity, because there would be countless meetings that managers might organize, or people will drop into their desk and say, by the way, there's this other thing we want you to do. Another person mentioned how they had ADHD, and they just found that being, you know, in an environment on their own, and they preferred that quietness, and they could go and make a cup of tea or whatever and come back to their desk. And, you know, if they had to do something in the house, they could get that done and come back to their work at a point in time. So I think there's very clearly groups of people, and it's very, very obvious, for whom remote working and hybrid working arrangements does definitely improve their productivity. Like, it's very hard not to agree with that. Then on the other side, I mean, there are obviously other jobs where the personal interaction with other people in a workplace, maybe there's more customer attention, maybe there's more dynamic workplace, where I think it's just the different types of roles that people have that is driving a lot of this distinction. And that was quite evident in the conversations, because the people who were most upset about, you know, like very opposed to this kind of blanket introduction was kind of people who are working in very large organizations, like tech sector, where it was coming down from, you know, and it was being applied to everyone, where their job was quite unique and quite specific and clearly worked in a remote working environment.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a lot of what this distinction is about.
I think one of the takeaways for us, one of the difficulties for the trade union negotiators around remote working is that the employer under the legislation only has to say, give you a reason, but they don't have to develop on that reason to just be able to justify the reason for bringing you back more days or ending the agreement. And they don't have to engage with you. There's no requirement under the legislation that they have to have a one-to-one meeting. They just have to provide you with a letter in writing stating the reason, not showing why that's the cause, remote working is the cause of their problem, or why bringing you back will resolve that. But I think from this finding to say that there is some workers, when they do get that requirement, a change in their work, they are open to that. And is that a takeaway for you, Kevin? Like, going forward, how would you address an employer who is looking to make a change to a remote working arrangement?
Well, first of all, I'm loving this moniker of First Kevin, so that is great. But I think it has to be a two-pronged approach, right? I think that first and foremost, if employers want to have a serious discussion about the need to come back into the office and what they're trying to address, that's fine. I think we're pretty reasonable people. I think that some of the research from Ireland Thinks showed how flexible people are in relation to that. So if you think there's a culture issue, or there's a teamwork issue, or there's a collaboration issue, then let's discuss that. Like, what does collaboration or teamwork look like to you? Do your employees agree that it's a problem? What kind of culture does your organization require to function? And then, will returning to the office help? So if we look at the Amárach research, where managers pointed that there was issues with staff, half the time they said it wasn't related to remote work. So like, and if, for the purposes of this conversation, remote work or more time in the office will help, then what kind of more time in the office, or what kind of return to office mandate? Because I think one thing, there is no scenario in my view in which a blanket return to office where people are required to come in 1 day more or 2 days more or so on helps anyone, be that an employee or an employer. And I think the other prong of that approach maybe applies to us a little bit more, whereas that if the employer is unwilling to have that conversation and does not want to entertain a discussion that's made jointly with employees and so on, then they can expect resistance from organised workers. Like, we know that this benefits employers, but much more importantly, we know that it benefits employees. And in organised work, and I think it's really important to note at this point, like, return to office mandates have been issued across the board from different kinds of organisations, and tech sectors were mentioned. The pushback is common from people who are in organised workplaces. So I think, yes, we have an opportunity, or we have a responsibility to ensure employers are engaging, but we also have a responsibility to organise and ensure that when they issue these return to office mandates or blanket return office, that they're going to be told quite quickly that it's not going to happen.
Thanks for that. And I think this is more a general question for the panel. The group I thought was the findings relating to were young workers, because the narrative out there is that remote and hybrid arrangements are really bad for young workers, that they're missing out on all this engagement with their colleagues, it's detrimental to their career progression, they're missing out on maybe meeting a potential partner, meeting those and making those friendships for life that many of us did do in those first jobs that we had. But the research coming out is showing that, actually, your own research, Kevin, was showing that young workers are more likely to have a remote or hybrid arrangement, but also that they're stronger advocates for remote working and hybrid arrangements than older workers.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is kind of a post-2020 thing. I think it's the way they understand. I mean, at the same time, if a young person decided that they did want that interaction, there are plenty of on-site jobs as well. And like most of the kind of on-site versus remote versus hybrid, like it does seem to be optional. We asked a question about whether it was their choice or the employer's choice. I mean, there was a very disproportionate large number of people saying who were remote or hybrid saying that it was their choice. So, you know, if they're missing out, that's their choice, I guess, you know, at the end of the day. And I'm sure they're finding the interactions elsewhere.
I mean, if I can build on that, yeah, we also saw that pattern evident in amongst the members, in that there was a greater proportion, or it was higher amongst younger age cohorts, those who working hybrid. But I suppose a bit of a watch out that came out from some of the qualitative research was that some of the people in the early stages of their career were so invested in their remote working opportunities that they were actually bypassing opportunities for promotion, because the trade-off was, you know, if it ended up that in some cases the salary didn't offset a longer commute, there was the risk of losing flexi time, there was, all in all, they felt in terms of a better quality of life that they would rather maintain their current status than progress further.
That's really interesting, because the interpretation, Margaret, and you might come in on this from it, is that by working remote and hybrid, you're somehow not able to compete with somebody who is on site to get that promotion. But what you're saying, Sinead, is people are actively not putting themselves forward for opportunity to go, you know, to maintain it.
I was interested to see in Kevin's presentation that sometimes hybrid working in the context of that research was considered to be a privilege. And again, the sense amongst these younger kind of career, early stage career people who took part in the groups was that it was they should consider it a privilege. You know, it was nearly a stick with which to beat them, or that they were bound by. They felt if they wanted more, to ask for more days working remotely, that would inhibit their chances actually of being promoted.
And that's kind of relating back to what I was talking before, the fact that, you know, research into hybrid is quite new, but if we see research around, you know, people requesting flexi time from years ago, there is the perception that it might negatively impact their careers, because, you know, when we talk about time in work, visibility, it equals commitment and productivity, because that's the mindset. And the key thing here is that needs to be changed. Just one of the other things in terms of younger workers being happier with more hybrid, as part of the kind of working group, we looked at trying to define hybrid, and it's obviously a continuum from remote to being in the office maybe 2-3 days. But there's a model that looks at obviously physical workspace, the time you're in the office versus working from home. But there's also a technical and social aspect, and that when we're talking about things like teamwork being the issue, you need to come back to the office. It's really thinking around, well, what is the problem And is there another solution beyond bringing people back to the office? And I think maybe, and again, this is anecdotal, and we said one of the things with the working group is we wouldn't be anecdotal, but is maybe younger people are more savvy with collaborating and feeling a sense of belonging through technology without necessarily having to work face to face.
Yeah, and sorry, Karen, I just wanted to follow up with that, but Margaret, you made the point of like asking people to come back in, to come more in for collaboration. Isn't that the point about like giving line managers investing in their skills, that they can think of alternatives to, it has to be on site, we have to be able to see the whites of each other's eyes to work as a team?
Exactly, and the surveys kind of said they were able to collaborate and work even when they were fully remote or off-site. So I think there's a lot of investment in terms of training, in terms of supporting the workers, in terms of collaborating and using technology without necessarily having to be face-to-face, but particularly kind of the line manager in terms of how they manage employees without necessarily that whole, I have to be able to see you, to trust that you're working, and being able to kind of manage workers whilst they're working from home. I think that's really, really important, and it has to kind of be reinforced.
And is it something that's coming through, I know, in your day job, when you're not chairing, is it something that's coming through in the curriculum in human resource management?
I teach MBAs, and they're all very happy with hybrid. And some of them are more worried about the fact that they can't see the workers, and they're worrying about things around mental health and how people are actually getting on, and the whole enabled intensification. So the fact that actually, because you can work from home and you can be working all the time, and that perception that it's almost like digital presenteeism, that because you can't be seen, you have to be shown to be working harder to get the promotion that you were talking about.
Sorry, Kevin.
No, not at all. I think it also points to the importance of comprehensive policies that address this. Like if mentorship and so on is really, really important for your organization, then you should have a policy that facilitates that. I will say it is somewhat challenging on the one hand to hear employers say that they're unconcerned about this, and on the other hand use AI to reduce headcount. Like the two things don't kind of marry up, but at the same time, a lot of these people are working in hybrid arrangements already. So if you need to be on site in order to, like, by osmosis learn a particular thing, and that's really valuable to your organization and so on, like in the vast majority of cases, the facilities and infrastructure are already there to address that, even though we see that people aren't particularly concerned about career development as a result of remote work.
Yeah. Just to follow up on a point Margaret made there about the working group, we're struggling at what is the definition of hybrid. I should mention I am on that working group. So one of the areas of, like, you know, it's not fully remote or hybrid. Hybrid, you know, it can be something as, you know, a couple of days a month, not even a week. But one thing that was coming out through the research was that that gap between what people have and what they want, and it's not just between those that have a hybrid arrangement and those that don't. It is that you know, those that have a hybrid would like to have more. I think that came true in both your pieces of research. Am I true?
Certainly, in the Amárach piece, what we were saying was just there's a huge variation in the structure of the hybrid working arrangement. So the number of days would vary significantly, as you would have seen in yours, and whether it was fortnightly, and whether there were anchor days or not, and what kind of work was counted as an on-site or an off-site day. So in the qualitative research, it was mentioned that, you know, sometimes on-site training would not have been counted as an on-site day. So, or equally, travel that was made around the country, say visiting different places, centres as part of the daily work, that equally was not counted as a on-site day, it was counted as an off-site day. So there's quite a number of anomalies in how flexi time is accrued, whether when you're working from home and working on site. So all those differences, I think, can sometimes leads to, well, how can they do it and I can't? You know, a greater, I think as you alluded to, Kevin, more consistency maybe in the policies and what counts for how you can qualify for remote working and how that's structured, it would certainly create a more level playing field from the members' research that we did from that perspective.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I found interesting is the distinction between within the hybrid, the mainly remote versus mainly, you know, and while there's things like childcare and home duties and all that, which doesn't really change as much, the relocation piece obviously becomes very different depending on how many days. Like if you're 4 days in the office, that relocation thing collapses immediately. But if you're 1 or 2 days, it's a much bigger deal. And as I know I've emphasized this a few times, but the thing that surprised me, maybe not surprised me, the thing that really came out of this research for me the most was how this isn't just about that individual employee, but rather if this whole thing unravels, there's massive consequences all over the place in terms of the constraints on government in particular. You know, the amount of extra parts of it that you can see in terms of housing, you know, traffic, and all these other bits and pieces, and how they're directly affected by this is incredible.
Yeah, linked to that, like we know from research that having access to hybrid work is really important for labour market participation, particularly for working mothers, carers, and people with chronic illnesses. So it gives them that flexibility in particular. So it is going back to that broader kind of social and economic piece, not just at the workplace.
Yeah. Kevin, did I think? So recognizing that 2/3 of the workforce are in jobs with even the most agreeable employer, their job just can't be done. It does require a physical presence. How can we sort of narrow that work-life balance privilege gap then if, you know, it's only going to be given to those that can work remotely? Kevin, how do you balance that between Fórsa has such a diverse membership, and you cover both those, a lot of office-based jobs that can be done hybrid and remote, and those, as I mentioned, it just can't because of the nature of the work.
So I do think there are more people who can do remote and hybrid work than are currently doing it. Certainly there is a gap between the amount of people who already have access, the amount that they have, and the amount that they want to have. But there are a group of people, and they're almost certainly sitting in this room, who in the last week did work in office on site that they know full well they could be doing at home. And I think that we need to be clearer about, or we need to be pushed back a little bit more on the assessment that a particular percentage of people can do absolutely no work from home. The other thing, and I think probably the more important aspect, is that remote hybrid work is one element of flexible work. Like there is, and there are probably people here who would acknowledge that maybe they can't do any of their job remotely, but I don't know if I'll find a person in this room or outside of it who would say that their work couldn't be more flexible. And so whether that's remote and hybrid work, whether that's the 4-day week, whether that's any other kind of arrangement that your individual employment, sector, industry, or whatever else can come up with, we need to be pushing to make sure that they're as broad and as expansive as possible. Obviously, Fórsa has done quite a lot of work in relation to the shorter working week. It's part of the pledge, no more than remote and hybrid work. And like being active, being vocal, being clear about that and the impact of that, the importance of that, and the value of that to everyone is going to be critical.
That's great. But the research also did tip on that, the benefits from other people working remote for those that have to travel to their jobs. Things like freeing up housing, some rural spending. There is sort of secondary benefits to the society and the economy and those that do require physical presence. That came true in both pieces of research?
I think at quite similar levels as well, like what people who are able to work remotely spend their time doing was very similar in both surveys. So it's kind of just managing your basically everything that's non-work related, household chores, looking after kids, being able to be more active, which impacts your health, being able to volunteer. It was a small percentage, but I mean, I know in a couple of our groups, there were at least 2 to 3 people, and one of them who said that the amount of volunteering that they used to be has declined because they work at the time they spend commuting to work and being involved in work. So there is a knock-on. It's a kind of it's a wider issue, as you've mentioned. You know, what happens if all those things are lost? I think that would be a bit of a frightening scenario. I think I mean, there's not enough childcare places as it is. You know, so how does that? If you have to go back to the office, how does that work? How do you square that off? You know, if you don't have family nearby to help you, it's a very tricky thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I like, and to the point that was made earlier in relation to the flexibility and people in different circumstances with caring responsibilities, and it's just you know, it's imagine if in the morning we decided that everyone has to drive to work now, and the ramifications of doing that. Just the idea of flexibility, just more generally allowing people, based on their circumstances, to be able to have these extra options. It helps society, I think, more generally as a whole. It probably increases the number of people in the workplace, I would say, in general. So.
One of the things you looked at is spending, that people felt that they were spending more money locally with that. Is that they're now spending their money differently, or they're actually spending more money? Were you able to drill that? Because we hear a lot from, you know, the representatives for shops and city centre feel that, you know, we're having nobody coming in on Fridays and Mondays because they seem to be 2 key days for a lot of city centre workers.
Yeah, that's your point is exactly. So they're just spending it in a different location, and probably I think spending slightly more as well because they have that flexibility to be, you know, at different times of the day, I guess. Yeah, no, the spending thing was very interesting, especially for those local economies. There was a couple of quotes from some people in there as well that we had from some of the qualitative research around, you know, about the nice cafes that were appearing in these very rural towns and villages because they happen to have lots of remote workers in the area, and little communities that were developing in little towns around Ireland. I think Arklow was one of them, where someone was talking about it quite a lot, that there were a lot of people that they knew that were purely working remotely, that, you know, Arklow's just, most of them would have a job in Dublin, but Arklow's just a little bit too far away to be going there every day. So there's a kind of a big change in that little town in particular. So.
Yeah, and I think we're not hearing enough of those voices, and hopefully something that'll come out with the NESC report looking at the wider issues, because we tend to hear from the representative groups, as I mentioned, for those that are losing out on that lunchtime spend or that after work drinks, but we're not necessarily hearing from the local cafes or the lunch options that are benefiting from more people being around and spending locally.
And volunteering, and people talking about how they're getting more involved in their local GAA club and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's clearly benefited local communities just in a big way.
Yeah. So we're coming to the last few minutes, and in my opening remarks, I said to those that participated, they can rest assured that these research won't be sitting on the shelf gathering dust. So Kevin, number one, can you tell our delegates the next steps for this?
So the next real step on the calendar is that presentation to NESC, which is taking place on the 11th of June. It's going to be a really important intervention, I guess, for us. But after that, it's really about organising. This research, I believe, makes a genuine and meaningful contribution to the debate on remote and hybrid work in Ireland. And I think it provides incredible insights into the experiences of workers working in a remote and hybrid situations, to the public's attitudes and experiences. And I think it means that we're better equipped to advocate for remote work as a result of it. But there's no point being well informed if you're not well organized. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, actually, there should be more remote and hybrid work in my workplace, or there's no remote and hybrid work in our sector and there should be some of it, then I guess your job is to read this research, to start organizing your workers, because you're in this room because you're leaders in your workplaces. And your capacity and ability to organize the people in your workplace and your branch's capacity and ability to do that will be the difference between our policies on remote work and theirs. It's really as simple as that. And I think that getting organized, getting active, and getting loud is the next step for everyone. But the research and the evidence is there for us now.
Well, I can't top that. So it leaves me to just thank our panel and to thank you for your patience in listening to all those numbers, all those slides, all those bar charts and pie charts, and all this talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you.